The False Glory of Perpetual War, by Iqbal Latif. For the young soldier on the road to Ahvaz, who carried his house key around his neck through 9 years of war and only wanted to go home. People ask me what I think about Iran, about this war, about who is winning, about how it ends. I have earned the right to answer, and I will not be wrong. I have not been wrong on these issues, not once. I was in Kuwait on 2nd August 1990 when Saddam's tanks rolled in. I escaped through Shalamshe on the Iraqi border, with my wife and my 3 small children, the youngest barely 5 years old. We drove through Khorramshahr so fast, in such fear, that I did not even realize we had passed through it. I only understood later what that city had been and what had been done to it. I watched the Berlin Wall fall with my own eyes. I was in Croatia when Bosnia burned. I covered Kosovo and told Clinton directly, the Albanian people will never forget what America did for them. I have lived inside the hinge points of modern history, stood in the rubble of collapsed regimes, and watched one-to-one the faces of men who believed their arrogance was invincible. I have seen Saddam's arrogance, Gaddafi's arrogance, Assad's arrogance. It always ends the same way: the bunker, the hole in the ground, the flight in the night. History does not forgive those who mistake theater for strategy. The soldier with the key. In October 1990, I traveled through southern Iran. The Iran-Iraq war had ended 2 years earlier. 1 million people dead. 9 years of war, sustained by Saddam's aggression, Khomeini's refusal to compromise, and the quiet satisfaction of those who watched Arabs and Persians destroy each other and called it convenient. On the road from Khorramshahr toward Ahvaz, a young soldier stopped us. He was no more than 20 years old. He had been sent to the front as a boy and had survived when a million others had not. He had no money to get home. Around his neck he wore a key, the key to his house. He had carried it through 9 years of war, through everything that war does to a young man, waiting for the day he could put it in a lock and go home. I let him into my car. We drove together to Ahvaz. He stayed with us that night at a hotel on the Karen River. My wife, my small children, this young soldier with his key. All of us exhausted. All of us trying to understand what had just happened to the world around us. The next morning, instead of taking the direct road, we were routed along the entire Gulf Coast. 14 hours to reach Shiraz. And along that road, from this soldier and from others we met, I heard the stories of what those 9 years had produced. Not victory, not glory, not the paradise promised by the slogans, empty roads, shattered cities. Young men with keys around their necks finally going home to houses they had not seen since they were boys, if those houses still stood at all. 1 million dead. And Saddam, satisfied that the war was over, immediately turned his army toward Kuwait. He had used the Iran-Iraq war as a staging ground. The Arabs had fought the Persians. He had watched and waited. And then he moved. I escaped that invasion with my family through the same border those soldiers had bled across for 9 years. I have never forgotten that young man's face, or his key, what victory looks like from inside a bomb crater. Now in 2025, I watch Iran absorb a different kind of destruction, and I think of that boy. A massive ordnance penetrator weighs 30,000 pounds, or as much as a city bus, compressed into a cylinder 20 feet long. Its hardened steel casing bores through the earth, smashing concrete and steel before detonating in the darkness far underground. It carries over 1,300 pounds of explosive material and delivers more than 10 times the destructive power of its predecessor. I remember Tora Bora. They removed mountains. This is that weapon, perfected and precision-guided, the most destructive conventional instrument human civilization has ever produced. Over 125 American aircraft, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, 14 of these instruments dropped on hardened nuclear targets buried deep inside mountains, all delivered in 25 minutes. Fordo lies 86 meters underground. They drop multiple bombs on the exact same point, sequentially, driving deeper with each impact. The earth itself was the enemy, and they defeated it. At least 430 Iranians killed, 3,500 injured. Internet shut 100%. No journalists allowed in. Nobody knows the real numbers, and from behind this darkness they announce victory. Victory does not require a blackout. Truth does not need a closed internet to survive. Iran also fired hundreds of missiles toward the GCC, at countries not even party to this conflict. Dubai intercepted 93% of them. Imagine if they had landed. Imagine the justification required, killing thousands of civilians guilty of nothing except choosing prosperity over perpetual war. This is not resistance against the powerful. This is aggression against the innocent, dressed in the language of the divine. The choke point illusion. I have written about the choke points of this earth for 31 years. America controls all 7 strategic choke points of the earth. It spends $900 billion on defense annually. It is the supreme military power of this civilizational moment. And yet, it has not bombed Pakistan, has not reduced to rubble the 57 Muslim-majority nations of the world. Why? Because those nations did not declare death to America, did not spend decades encircling its allies with proxies and missiles, did not dangle nuclear ambitions publicly while calling for the annihilation of neighboring states. No one can pummel you if you choose not to live in perpetual aggression. The evidence of history makes this plain. Already 7.5 million barrels of the 20 million that flow through the Strait of Hormuz have rerouted, through the East-West pipeline, through Dubai and Abu Dhabi. China's 6 million barrels are not stopping. Japan's 2.5 million are not stopping. The world engineers around you, pipeline by pipeline, deal by deal, until the threat you spent 47 years building is quietly rendered irrelevant. The Houthis closed the Red Sea and people cheered, until oil prices rose and the same people asked why their cost of living was destroying them. You cannot cheer the fire and then complain about the heat. Iran's currency tells you everything its slogans refuse to admit. The Iranian rial has lost 99% of its value against the dollar since 1979. That is not sanctions alone. That is the compounded price of choosing ideology over the lives of your own people, paid daily in the currency your children must use to survive. Perpetual resistance. The mechanism of failed leadership. Here is what nobody is saying plainly enough. Perpetual resistance is not a strategy. It is an identity protection mechanism for leaderships that have nothing else to offer their people. Iran's leadership needs the war. Without it, 47 years of sacrifice demand an accounting. Without an enemy, the question becomes, what were all those deaths for? What was the revolution for? What happened to the promise? The enemy must always exist. The siege must never end, because the moment peace arrives, the identity collapses, and with it, the justification for everything done in its name. The leaders understand this, the people do not. That gap between the leadership that knows what perpetual resistance actually protects and the people who sacrifice for it in genuine faith is the oldest betrayal in political history. A population persuaded to celebrate the conditions of its own immiseration. Generations conscripted into someone else's ideological survival. No nation has sustained 47 years of chosen confrontation and emerged stronger. Not one. Name it. I will wait. The Saddam Khomeini War alone. 9 years. 1 million dead. 2 ancient civilizations. What was won? What was built? What glory was achieved for those million souls? Judge the tree by what it produces, not by what it promises. Everything is. Not Karbala. Islam does not teach perpetual war. Anyone who interprets it that way commits a specific and historic violence against their own tradition. That interpretation has cost millions of lives and produced nothing but rubble and the humiliation of the very people it claims to elevate. Ibn Khaldun understood this in the 14th century with crystalline clarity. Civilizations rise through productive social energy directed toward building. When that energy turns entirely toward perpetual conflict, the civilization hollows from within. Its banners still flying while its foundations crumble beneath them. I remember when 9/11 happened. I saw people celebrating quietly, in corners, with terrible satisfaction. 5 nations were subsequently destroyed. Millions of lives shattered. And then the same people discovered that the Taliban were ugly, that there is no such thing as a good terrorist, that bloodlust wrapped in religious language is still bloodlust. We must be honest about ourselves. The TTP, BLA, and TLP remind us that no nation is immune to this disease. We have no standing to preach unless we acknowledge our own infections and the fact that they draw from the same poisoned well that has brought Iran to its knees. You declare death to nations and you become a target. That is not persecution. That is consequence. Everything is not Karbala. Everything is not martyrdom. Life is, primarily, essentially, for living. The standard that applies to everyone or no one. Pakistan is bombing Hibbatullah, the TTP leadership sheltering in Afghanistan, and the world is silent. Why? Because Hibbatullah exports death into Pakistan. He harbors killers. He sends them across the border to murder our people. The world understands this. Nobody calls it aggression. So explain to me the difference with Iran. Iran harbors the Houthis, who close international sea lanes and fire missiles at civilian shipping. Iran arms Hamas, providing the rockets that triggered the destruction of Gaza, the very destruction its supporters then weep over. Iran funds Hezbollah. Iran is Hibatullah, multiplied across 5 proxy armies, spread across an entire region. If it is acceptable for Pakistan to strike those who export death across our border, and the world agrees it is, then the same logic applies to Iran. You cannot celebrate Pakistan's right to self-defense and simultaneously defend Iran's right to export violence to every neighbor it has. The selective conscience that cheers Pakistani strikes on the TTP but condemns responses to Iranian proxies is not a principled position. It is tribalism dressed as moral reasoning. The standard applies to everyone, or it applies to no one. The standard we demand for ourselves. We watched 60,000 children die in Gaza. We posted, we emoted, we lit candles. But we never once demanded that the rockets stop. The rockets that guarantee the bombs will follow. For ourselves, we move heaven and earth to secure a ceasefire. For others, we celebrate perpetual sacrifice and call it divine resistance. Apply the same standard everywhere or apply it nowhere. That is not idealism. That is the minimum requirement of intellectual honesty. The people who most loudly celebrate resistance are the least likely to pay its price. The intellectuals who romanticize perpetual war do so from cities that will never be bombed. They want the glory of resistance and the comfort of normalcy simultaneously. The children of Gaza did not choose this. The people of Iran did not choose this. They were conscripted into someone else's ideological identity at the cost of their own lives. Iran's greatness and its tragedy. Let me say what the critics celebrating the bombs will not say. Iran is one of the great civilizations of this earth. Its people are among the most intelligent, cultured, and sophisticated on this planet. The Golden Age of Islam, the Translation Movement, the House of Wisdom, Al-Khwarizmi, Ibn Sina, Al-Biruni, drew directly from the Sassanid intellectual inheritance. The Abbasid Caliphate under Ma'mun borrowed from Gandhi Shapur, the ancient Persian academy that preserved and synthesized Greek, Indian, and Persian knowledge for centuries. Without Persia, the Islamic Golden Age does not exist in the form we know it. Go further back. Cyrus the Great issued the first known declaration of human rights in 539 BC, 2.5 millennia before the modern world claimed to have invented the concept. The idea that rulers have obligations to the ruled, that conquered peoples have rights, that religious tolerance is a principle of governance, these are Persian gifts to human civilization. This is the civilization that 47 years of ideological warfare has brought to its knees. Not outside enemies alone. The choices of its own leadership and the theological foundation of that leadership is contested from within its own highest authority. Grand Ayatollah Sistani, the most widely followed Shia scholar alive, does not recognize Wilayat al-Faqih, the doctrine of clerical supreme guardianship that forms the entire basis of the Islamic Republic. The entire justification for sacrificing generations of Iranian lives rests on a doctrine the greatest living Shia authority considers theologically unsound. The people of Iran were never given a choice. They were conscripted into an ideology disputed at its very root. Iran could have been at the top of the world. With its people, its resources, its civilizational depth, it should have been a beacon. Instead, its young people dream of leaving. Its currency is dust, its cities dark, its wounds hidden behind a closed internet. That is the true tragedy, not the bombs. The choices that made the bombs inevitable. Show me one resistance that succeeded. Vietnam succeeded. Yes, I have been to Ho Chi Minh City. What was Saigon? You know what it is today, the most Americanized city in Asia. After decades of war, after millions dead, Vietnam's final victory was to become what it fought against. Communism is dead. The ideology is gone. What survived was the people, the nation, the geography. And even Vietnam had to compromise everything to live. North Korea chose the alternative. Look at it from a satellite at night. Darkness. Complete total darkness. Cuba, frozen in time. Venezuela, collapsing under the weight of its own slogans. And look at the men themselves. Saddam, found in a hole in the ground, disheveled, broken. Gaddafi, dragged through the streets. Osama bin Laden, hiding in a compound for years. A fugitive in his own cause. Baghdadi, blown apart in a tunnel. Assad, living today in a small flat in Moscow, imprisoned by his own survival. Not a conqueror, not a martyr, a refugee of his own ideology. This is what the end of false bravado looks like. Not glory, not martyrdom. A A small flat, a dark country, a hole in the ground. Compromise is not defeat. It is the only door through which any of them ever eventually walk. Some sooner, some after unforgivable cost. But all of them, in the end, through that same door. Iran will capitulate. Iran has fired over 2,000 missiles. America has the capacity to enforce this outcome and the will to do so. Food cannot come in. Oil cannot go out. The economy is dust. The missiles are spent. The ideology cannot feed a child, heat a home, or pay a salary. The ports will open. The oil will flow again, because the world needs it to flow, and the world will ensure it flows. The Strait of Hormuz will open. Not because Iran wins, because Iran has no choice. Iran will capitulate not in a declaration, not with fanfare, but in the quiet, grinding, inevitable way that all ideologies capitulate when they finally collide with the unchangeable reality of human need. People need to eat. People need to live. People need a future for their children. No slogan, however divine it claims to be, has ever permanently defeated those three needs. The only question, the only real question, is how many more people must suffer before the leaders admit what the people already know. I will be right. You will be wrong. I am not writing this to convince the ideologues. They cannot be convinced. They are too invested in their own narrative to hear anything that challenges it. I am writing this because history will confirm it. It always does. You are destroying yourselves, and you will look back at the rubble, at the currency, at the young people who left, at the cities bombed into darkness, and you will understand too late that someone told you this was coming. Every time America arrives, parts of the Muslim world unite against it. Every time America leaves, the same world tears itself apart. The enemy was never outside. The enemy was always the refusal to look inward, at the ideology that feeds the violence, at the leaders who profit from the suffering, at the slogans that outlive the people who die for them. The standard is on my side, not yours. History is on my side, not yours. There is a way to live. I think of that young soldier on the road to Avaz, 20 years old, a key around his neck, 9 years of war behind him, 1 million of his generation dead. He did not ask me about ideology. He did not speak of resistance or martyrdom or divine destiny. He asked for a ride home. That is all any people ever really want. A ride home. A key that still fits a lock. A house still standing. Iran deserves better. The heirs of Cyrus and Al-Khwarizmi and Hafez and Rumi deserve decent living. Open markets, a stable currency, freedom of thought, and a future worthy of their extraordinary civilizational inheritance. The measure of a nation is not the grandeur of its slogans, it is the quality of life of its people. Compromise is the most underrated word in the political vocabulary. Your whole existence as a human being is a compromise, in your family, your street, your nation, your world. The absence of compromise is not strength. It is the refusal to be human. The Persian poets understood what the ideologues forgot. Hafez wrote that the heart choosing love over war inherits the earth. Rumi wrote that beyond the battlefield of right and wrong, there is a field, and that is where life actually lives. Iran's leaders have kept their people from that field for 47 years. It is time, long past time, to go there.